Morning, all. All right, so if I can get my brain working, this should be the last take. We shall see. I don't know how many I've done, but it's been a lot. So Detroit ends up finishing first in the league in 1949, 1950. They do win the Stanley Cup that season as well. And so, yeah, that's something Detroit's pretty good at. 37, 19, and 14 is their record as the league expands its schedule to 70 games. There's only 6 teams, meaning you play every team in the league 14 times. 88 points for the Detroit Red Wings, who are coached by Tommy Ivan. 229 goals scored, 164 goals against. The Montreal Canadiens second in the league with 77 points, a record of 29, 22, and 19. 172 goals scored, 150 goals against. Dick Irvin's the coach. Again, Montreal every year seems to be just the best in terms of their goals against, which of course means Vezina trophies and continuing to build on their mystique as being just a very, very well coached team. Toronto's third in the league, 31, 27, and 12 record, 176 goals scored, 173 goals against. That is a 74-point season for the team that is led by Hap Day. The New York Rangers, 28, 31, and 11, so 67 points for them. 170 goals scored, 189 goals against. Lynn Patrick is their coach at this point, so the New York Rangers back in the playoffs. Boston, 22, 32, and 16 as they missed the playoffs with 60 points, 198 goals scored, 228 goals against. Georges Boucher is their coach. For the Chicago Blackhawks, they're 22, 38, and 10, 54-point season. 203 goals, which is second in the league. It's goals against that's the problem. 244, they are led by Charlie Conacher. We're going to talk about Conacher. So first off, yes, the schedule goes to 70 games. I would imagine you would get tired of seeing the same teams often, but I mean, really, back then you don't have like every game on television. Like it's not the same experience, right? So 3 Habs players get charged with assault after fighting during a game with the Chicago Blackhawks, a game that got completely out of control. Turk Broda ends up sitting out a few games as Conn Smythe basically calls him fat in front of everybody and sits him down until he's lost 10 pounds. And then Turk Broda can go back in. But yeah, Conn Smythe not happy with the conditioning of Turk Broda. The last time a Maple Leaf will be talked about with his conditioning, I'm sure. The Wings, they trade Bill Quackenbush to the Bruins, and it's suspected that GM Jack Adams doesn't like his lack of physical play. So the previous season, the Lady Byng went to Quackenbush because he had no penalties at all that season. But when you're on the blue line, you have no penalties at all. It's gentlemanly. It can also be seen as kind of soft, depending on the player. Not saying that about Slavin. And then Gordie Howe, in just a freak accident, he collides with Ted Kennedy during a playoff game. Howe ends up breaking his nose, his cheekbone, and he gets a pretty nasty concussion out of it. So pretty brutal hit there. And again, it's just a collision. It's one of those things where if you're not ready for it, it's far more dangerous. January 21st of 1950, Bill Durnan becomes the first Habs goaltender to reach 200 wins. Won't be the last. Bill Durnan is something to talk about a lot during these videos, of course. February 5th of 1950, Dick Irvin is the first coach in NHL history to reach 500 wins. March 26th of 1950, Ted Lindsay sets an NHL record with his 55th assist, breaks Elmer Locke's record, which had been 54. January 8th of 1950, Terry Sawchuk makes his NHL debut when Harry Lumley gets hurt in a game that Boston beats Detroit 4-3. But Sawchuk ends up with a record of 4-3 on the season, so he's on his way. Lumley's going to be pushed aside. April 20th of 1950, Don Rowley is the first player with back-to-back overtime goals in the Stanley Cup final. He accomplishes that with the New York Rangers. Rangers don't end up being victorious in the Stanley Cup overall. However, Rowley, pretty good effort there. June 1949, the decision is made to paint the ice white. So now people are watching on television. A little bit easier to see the puck if the ice is white on their black and white TVs because the puck's black, right? So it should work. It's still painted to this day. February 8th of 1950, after a 9-2 loss against Detroit, Coach Charlie Conacher of the Chicago Blackhawks, a little bit ornery, and he ends up punching a reporter. He ends up being fined $200 for punching the reporter. No, you cannot punch a reporter now and you have to give up $200. It's silly. Bill Durnan gets booed by Montreal fans themselves. And they booed him a couple years before, too. There's a love-hate relationship Habs fans have had with certain players. Apparently, Durnan's one of those guys. But he had announced that he was intending to retire. He had a lot of cuts that season. Remember, there's no masks. So he had a lot of cuts. One of them got infected. He needed penicillin to treat it. Got pretty sick. But yeah, the fans in Montreal, pretty ruthless at this point. Just they want Stanley Cups and no talking about retirement or your own personal whatever. We want those Stanley Cups. Go out there and do what you're going to do. So that season, Ted Lindsay is the leading scorer. 69 games, 23 goals, 55 assists, 78 points. Again, that 55 assists sets an NHL record at the time. Sid Abel of Detroit, 69 games, 34 goals, 35 assists, 69 points. And Gordie Howe of Detroit, as the production line goes 1, 2, 3 in league scoring. 70 games for Gordie Howe, 35 goals, 33 assists, 68 points. Maurice Rocket Richard's right behind him, 70 games played, 43 goals, 22 assists, 65 points. So he's getting back towards that 50-goal mark. Paul Ronte for Boston, 70 games, 23 goals, 36 assists, 59 points. Roy Conacher of Chicago, 70 games, 25 goals, 31 assists, 56 points. So scoring is still down. Harry Lumley of Detroit, 33, 16, and 14 record, 2.35 goals against, 7 shutouts. So the shutout totals are going back up. Turk Broda of Toronto, 30, 25, and 12 record, 2.47 goals against, and 9 shutouts. In fact, he had a really good run going after being sat out for having gained weight. Chuck Rayner for the Rangers, 28, 30, and 11 record, 2.62 goals against, 6 shutouts. Bill Durnan for Montreal, pretty strong season for his last year. 26, 21, and 17 record, 2.2 goals against average, and 8 shutouts. Your Hart Trophy goes to Chuck Rayner, the New York Rangers goaltender. The Art Ross goes, of course, to Ted Lindsay of the Detroit Red Wings. The Calder goes to Jacques Gelinas. Jack Gelinas of Boston is a goaltender. So there's another goaltender with a major award to go with the Vezina going to Bill Durnan of Montreal. So of the 5 major awards, 3 of them go to goaltenders. The Lady Byng goes to Edgar Laprade of the New York Rangers. Your All-Stars from around the NHL that year. First-team All-Star from Detroit, Sid Abel, down the middle. And Ted Kennedy for Toronto is your second-line center. On the right wing, Maurice Richard's first-team All-Star. Gordie Howe is second-team All-Star, so Habs and Red Wings respectively. On the left side, Ted Lindsay of Detroit is the first-team All-Star. Tony Leswick of the Rangers is the second-team All-Star. On the blue line, Gus Mortson of Toronto is the first-team All-Star, as well as Ken Reardon of Montreal. And then Leo Rice of Detroit is your second-team All-Star, as well as Red Kelly of the Detroit Red Wings. In net, Bill Durnan of Montreal is the first-team All-Star. Chuck Rayner of the New York Rangers is the second-team All-Star. So we get into the playoffs, and again, Toronto and Detroit, so 1-3. Montreal Rangers, 2-4, and here we go. Toronto beats Detroit 5-0 in the first game, and these series are always bonkers during this era. Detroit wins the second game 3-1. The third game, Toronto wins 2-0 to go up 2-1. Detroit then wins in double overtime in Game 4 to win by a score of 2-1 to even the series. Toronto then goes into Detroit and wins 7-0. So they come home with a 3-2 series lead, and they lose 4-0 at home against Detroit before Detroit wins in overtime 1-0 to win the series in 7. In the other semifinal, again, it's Montreal and the Rangers. The Rangers win 3-1 in the first game. The Rangers win the second game 3-2. That's in Montreal. The third game's in New York as well. So I'm guessing circus. 4-1 win for the Rangers at home in Game 3, and then Games 4 and 5 are in Montreal. Montreal wins in overtime. The only game they win in the series in Game 4, 3-2. And then the Rangers win 3-0 in Game 5 to win the series in 5. Stanley Cup Final, it does not help the Rangers that they can't play a game at home. They don't play a game at MSG because it's circus time, right? So Detroit wins the first game at home 4-1. The next 2 games, the Rangers are designated the home team, but the games are played in Toronto. The Rangers win 3-1 in the first of those 2 games, and then Detroit wins 4-0 in the next to go up 2-1. Every other game's in Detroit. 4-3 win for the Rangers in Detroit in overtime, and then a 2-1 win for the Rangers in Detroit in overtime as well. As I said, same player with back-to-back goals in those overtimes. But Detroit wins Game 6, 5-4, and then in double overtime in Game 7, the first time that Game 7 of a Stanley Cup final goes to overtime, Detroit wins 4-3 in double overtime. Your leading scorers in those playoffs, Pentti Lund of the New York Rangers, 12 games, 6 goals, 5 assists, 11 points. Jerry Couture of Detroit, 14 games, 5 goals, 4 assists, 9 points. Don Rowley of the Rangers, 12 games, 4 goals, 5 assists, 9 points. And George G of the Detroit Red Wings, 14 games, 3 goals, 6 assists, 9 points. So some depth scoring there for Detroit when the production line isn't scoring as much. Broda ends up with a 1.33 goals against average in these playoffs. Lumley of Detroit, 1.85 goals against average in the playoffs as the Detroit Red Wings win. And of course, it takes 8 wins to get the Stanley Cup. So if you ever wonder why an octopus for Detroit, the octopus hasn't hit the ice yet, but that's the idea. There's eight limbs on an octopus, and there's 8 wins needed for the Stanley Cup during this era. So I guess now, really, they should have 2 octopuses because you need 16. So maybe they need 2 of them locked at the tentacles. And it is octopuses. I know octopi sounds better, but there you go. Anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event that you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.